In this talk I want to recapture some of the themes of the previous talks, the effects of salinity on plant growth and waterlogging on plant growth, and draw that together into a set of principles for plant zonation on salt land. When I joined the Department of Agriculture in the 1980s, I think we did saltland pastures a bit like this. We'd find a bare area of salt land and we'd plant a few plants and we'd string up a bit of a fence, and sometimes the stuff grew and sometimes the stuff died, but we always chose sites near main roads because it was good for extension. And so the legacy of those plant deaths lingered. We had a nice fence to show where the dead plants were, and they lingered. And farmers were really not very happy. They'd think about this sort of stuff and they'd say encouraging things to us like, "It doesn't bloody work." Now, it was with this sort of background that I think it became really important, for us to really understand how we could get plants into saline landscapes where they would really do the right thing, grow for us, revegetate the land and make farmers money. So this I think is the sort of conversation we'd like to see. We've got a bloke over here who's a farmer, and he says, "What can I grow on this salt land?" And we've got an advisor on this side, and he says, "Well, we've measured this and this and this, and we reckon that you can grow whatever it is." So we've been spending some time over the last 3 years working out what this and this and this means. Here's some thoughts about that. This is the sort of thing we don't want to see. This is a really good example of what not to do. Here's a guy who's planted a few saltbush plants, but you can see they're in the dead wrong part of the landscape. They're not growing very well. Nothing's going to grow down here. He needs to have been growing them much more on the edge of that piece of salt-affected land. So what kinds of criteria would you use to say, not here, over there? I think the principles of plant zonation can really be summarized in this slide. We've got soil salinity going from low to high on the x-axis, and we've got depth to water table going from shallow to deeper on the y-axis. And these are the factors that operate in determining what grows where. We've got very shallow water tables. It'll be excessive waterlogging that's going to be a problem. We've got high levels of salinity. It's going to be salinity that's the problem. We have deep water tables. Could well be dryness is the limiting factor. And if everything's good, then we've got excessive competition from other plants. All right, that's quite a mouthful in terms of general principles. Let's see how this works. I'm going to show you a set of slides in which we're going to look at plant zonation, salinity and depth to water table. So here we are. Here's our matrix again. Soil salinity going from low to high, depth to water table going from shallow to deeper. We can put a cursor, if you like, in that matrix and start to move it around. So let's take our cursor down to here. We're looking at deepish water tables, not very saline. These are good soils. Successful plants in this kind of environment are going to be the plants that have high vigour. They were the soils that grew our great forests before we cleared them, and these are the soils which grow our great cereal crops. They're the best soils on the farm. Come over here. We're now looking at highly saline soils. The successful plants that grow in these landscapes are going to be halophytes, those salt-loving plants that we've talked about in earlier talks. Now we'll come up here to a waterlogged, mildly saline environment, and this waterlogging is causing an oxygen deficiency in the soils and therefore in the plants. That's decreasing the energy production, and the plants that are really well adapted to this environment are the plants that produce these snorkels that we talked about in the previous talk. and that's the snorkels are allowing oxygen to diffuse to where it's needed. And here's a cross section of a root, the shoot up there, the root tip down here. We're forming aerenchyma, those cavities in the root which are enabling the oxygen to be moved from the shoot to the root tip. Some of it leaks out. We can't have a leaky snorkel, so the other adaptation is the barrier to radial oxygen loss, and the plant that does this superbly, of course, is Puccinelia. Now we move over here. We're now in an environment which is waterlogged and highly saline. What the waterlogging does in this particular environment is that it forces the plants to be extremely shallow rooted, and yet when the soil dries out in summer, what this means is that we have plants which are left high and dry. Their roots are all in the shallow soil. The salinity of the soil solution is extremely high in this surface soil in summer, and the plant that handles this kind of condition really well is samphire. It's waterlogging tolerant, but it has this exceptional ability to withstand extremely high salt concentrations in the soil solution. And finally, we come down to a situation where we have saline soils with a deeper water table, and now another opportunity arises because this groundwater can sub-irrigate plants. It's there as a source of water that the plants can use in summer if the plants are deep-rooted enough. And the sorts of plants that use these kinds of water sources are going to be salt bushes and blue bushes. So you can see that there are a range of different kinds of responses to the saline environment, the saltland environment, and not all plants are suited to all saltland locations. We've sort of summarized as much information as our research information, at least, into a salinity depth to waterlogging water table matrix. Looks a bit like this. We've got increasing subsoil salinity on the x-axis. You'll notice that that's a logarithmic scale, 1, 2, 4, 8, 16, 32. And we've got depth to water table in summer on the y-axis, and you can see that it's the salt-tolerant grasses, things like saltwater couch and Rhodes grass, which are adapted to the shallow water tables. And here are the data for tall wheatgrass and Puccinelia from the work of Summer Jenkins. So you can see that it's the grasses that are handling the areas with the shallowish water tables. The shrubs need deeper water tables. Okay, so in terms of the slide that we started with, what can we grow on salt land? What are the critical factors? What should we measure? I think the answer is we should measure subsoil salinity, and we need to know something about the depth to water table. And the slide that I just shown you was for depths to water table in summer. Why does all this matter? I think all this matters because farms normally contain saltland soils with a wide range of capabilities, and reliable site diagnosis is going to encourage farmer adoption. And our Saltland Genie tool will help with site diagnosis. The principles that I've talked about are now embedded into the Saltland Genie website, and I do suggest that you have a look at it, www.saltlandgenie.org.au. I want to now tell you a story about how I think that understanding the categories of saltland capability can really help us achieve far more than just the revegetation of the land that we directly put plants into. You can think of saltland as having a range of capabilities. We've got extremely affected land, highly affected land, moderately affected land, and probably more insidiously from the farmer's point of view, land at future risk of salinity. And my view is that revegetating some land may help save the rest. So let me give you an example of what I'm thinking about. We could target the revegetation in this hypothetical landscape into just a moderately affected area. Why should we do that? Because we're going to make a lot of money doing that directly from the intervention. So to do that, we're going to plant whatever it is, the farming system, and we're going to fence it on the top and bottom side. But what that fencing does is that it changes the grazing footprint on the severely affected land as well, and on the extremely affected land, because all of that's below this moderately affected land in the landscape. And so we've in fact saved the extremely and severely affected land from grazing. In the extremely affected area, we're probably going to see samphire recruitment. In the severely affected area, there'll probably be bluebush recruitment, and with time these stands will grow up. The samphire and the bluebush will develop and eventually become mature, very well stable, long-term stands. And bluebush is grazable in its own right. Once this has developed, it might then be worthwhile for the farmer to put another fence in between the severely affected and the extremely affected and graze the bluebush. So the principle that I'm talking about here is a principle of leverage. It's using an intervention in the landscape to achieve change on a far greater scale than just the landscape where the planting was made. So, plant zonation, in summary. Many saltland plantings fail because we don't take account of the principles affecting plant zonation. And these failures are really important because I think they erode one of the most precious things that we have, which is the hope that we can actually achieve good and useful things. We can't afford failures because that erodes people's capacity for hope. I think that zonation depends on salinity and depth to water table. There are probably a few other things that are going to come along, but the main game is understanding salinity and depth to water table. Halophytic grasses like Puxnelia and tall wheatgrass are going to grow with a shallower water table, but shrubs like saltbush are going to need a deeper water table. Getting this right is going to encourage farmer adoption. Getting it wrong is going to be enormously discouraging. And finally, remember the principle of leverage. We don't have to plant everywhere to have a really good result. Okay? Thanks very much. See you on the next module.